Hello, everybody. This is Ryan from I Try Running Programs, and we're into the 6th week of the Hal Higdon Advanced One Marathon Training Program. And this would essentially signal about a third of the way for most people completing this program. In my case, I'm going to taper probably 1 week less just based on time. So this is roughly about the 40% done mark for me so far through the program. Now, in terms of what the week does in terms of breakdown of the runs, would be 3 easy runs to start, a 3 mile run, a 7 mile run, and another 3 mile run, followed by 2 speed days that are kind of cartoned off with a rest day in between. But the first speed day would be a 5 by 800 meter repeat, and then a 7 mile goal pace run after your rest day. And then that ends the week with a 10 mile long run. I will admit this was run a little bit out of order. I put the long run before the goal pace run just based on scheduling concerns. But by and large, none of the runs were swapped out for any other reason. So in terms of the overall week, that broke down to roughly a little bit more than 36 miles. So a little bit of a decrease, probably about 10% less mileage for this week compared to the previous 2 weeks, which gives your legs, I suppose, a small little breather. But with the speed work, it makes sense to probably have a little bit less overall running, so your legs aren't getting too taxed. So for the first 3 runs, I won't belabor the point, but I'll just go over them quickly. The first one, for whatever reason, I ran 4 miles instead of 3, and I ran them at right around an 8-minute average pace. The only thing I didn't particularly like about this run is coming out a little bit slow and then speeding up. I prefer to run it really, really flat. And these runs, really for me, I'm pretty much happy anywhere between 8 to 9 minutes. But really wouldn't mind running all of my easy mileage right at that 8:30 pace, just to keep it nice, consistent, easy. So still trying to work on that a little bit mentally. And you can see I had basically the same problem in the second run, which was a 7 mile easy run. A little bit of a time under feet type run. Hal has these a lot in kind of the middle portion of your week, usually the second run or the fourth run, depending on the week. And essentially this, ends up just being relatively easy mileage, done a little bit more consistently in the third through the 7th mile. But the first 2 miles, the reason you might see this, especially in the particular course that I'm running, is it starts super, super flat for me, then goes downhill, and then goes into some undulation. So that can make some sense there as to why those runs start so quickly and then they kind of, taper off into slower mileage, because it's easier to control yourself here where there's more undulation. So you're getting some uphill, some downhill, which is really good for CIM. Since I'm running the California International Marathon, you really do want some undulation just to get used to what the course will kind of play out like when you're actually running the marathon. Now, the third run of the week, another super easy short run, 3 miles, a little bit faster than an 8-minute pace. Another one where I sped up a bit, but essentially nice and easy, nothing really to report here. But once we get into the workouts, this is where things got a little bit interesting. So the first major workout for the week came out to a total of 6 miles, but it's essentially just 5 by 800 meter repeats. And the way that I run them is just the way that Hal recommends in one of a few ways that he recommends them, I should say. And that is, running the 800 meters hard and then actually walking back to where you're going to do your repeat again. Since I do my repeats just basically on a measured out half-mile stretch of road that's really, really flat, I just basically run out and then I walk back and then I run out. And so basically that's how I break down those 5 repeats. And so you'll see that big swing in timing and pace because of that. So the mileage pace is really relatively unimportant here. What's important is those big spikes. When you see those big spikes, that's really where I'm pushing it. Now, the cool thing about this run was that it essentially, got a PR in the 800 at 2:45. I think that's a relatively soft PR that will be continuously broken as I go through this training effort. But similarly, you can see I had a relatively faster 400-meter effort tied within there at some point, and then got some kind of little local awards here, which are always cool, I suppose. Now, the way that I like to run this workout is essentially nice, easy run out to where I start, and then I usually drop a water bottle right at this park so I can grab it on the way back. And then I'll kind of just jog over to my start line and then just go back and forth as I'm doing those repeats, as I talked about before. Now, the way that I did this might be, I wouldn't say counterintuitive, but might not be exactly the way that Hal Higdon would write it up in his training program. So as a reminder, for the intervals, by and large, Hal wants you to run those in a minute and second total comparative to your hour and minute total in the marathon. So if you were aiming like me for a 3:05 marathon, then theoretically you should be running these repeats at a 3:05 pace. In my case, this time I decided to do it a little bit differently and do more of a ladder. where I started just a touch slower at about 3:20 on my first repeat. Then my second repeat was closer to 3 minutes. Then I believe I ran a high 250s, low 250s, and then the last one was a 245, if I'm getting my math correct. So essentially, I ran them a little bit faster each rep. And for me, I think because I'm running these in the morning, that seems to make the most sense. So my average 800 should be right around that 305 pace. However, some are going to be a little bit slower as I'm warming up. And then as I'm starting to finish out the work, it kind of gets a little bit faster. So I'm getting a bigger and bigger training stimulus. That's not necessarily something I think Hal would be opposed to, I'm assuming, based on the way that he wrote his training programs. But it just makes the most sense to me. So that way in the morning, I'm out there so early, I can just give my legs and my stomach and myself really some time to get really motivated to run those repeats hard. This time too, I think another reason why this workout went a little bit better than the 4x800 meter repeat I ran loosely 3 or 4 weeks ago was that I had water with me. The first time I forgot water, and that was just brutal. This time having water made it a lot easier, and I just really made sure that when I was walking back, I was taking my time, just listening to some music, having plenty of water, and not worrying about how long it took me to get back from where I started so that I could start the next rep, just taking it nice and easy. So you can see there's good heavy work followed by very slow, leisurely walks back to the start for the next repeat again. So overall, I mean, a really exciting workout for me. And once again, and you'll kind of see this in the next run that I talk about. I'm loving seeing this very quick increase in top end speed because it just tells me that there's a lot of potential that I haven't tapped into yet. Since I've been doing basically easy running since the start of the pandemic, I have a ton of underlying speed that I think is there. And especially as I'm continuing to work on my physique and make sure that I'm leaner and leaner by race day, who knows what the ultimate 800 meter, really kind of peak PR time could be by the time I'm done training. I really don't think this 245 was that difficult, even though it was the fastest one that I ran for the day. None of the repeats felt terribly taxing. So I think that's a really good sign about where my speed is going as a whole. Now, the one deviation that I made in Hal's plan to my particular week of running was putting the long run before the goal pace run. Normally you run that goal pace one and run, and then the next day run your long run. For sake of time, Fridays are really pretty solid days for me to get a long run in. So you'll see that a lot in my training. But this one ended up being a 10-mile long run at 8:48 pace. So maybe a touch slower than I would like it to be. I'd probably like to keep my long runs right at the easy running pace of about 8:30, or in some cases even faster. But not a huge problem by any stretch of the imagination. The thing that I liked about this run is overall it was very consistent, kind of stayed in that high 840 to 850-ish range throughout the run. A couple miles a little bit faster, a couple miles maybe a little bit slower, but by and large, a very controlled and simple effort. So for a long run, you can't complain, and especially like this particular long run where Hal really tapers your long run down every 3 weeks or so. This is in a lot of ways just an elongated easy run. So there's no reason to really beat yourself up. You could do it in a 3-run training style where you do the first 75% of the run very easy, and then the last 25% harder. But in my case, I wanted to save my legs for the next workout, which was important to me. I think the goal pace runs are the ones that I've struggled with the most in this training program, not because the intensity is too hard, but because I think a lot of times I'm not giving it its due effort and its due diligence in terms of prepping myself for that run each week. Now, I say that, I think this particular goal pace run went really, really well. And I would consider this probably my best run of the training program so far, just kind of pound per pound, mile by mile type run. This was about as good as it gets. Now, I actually put 7 miles by 10K pace. I got a little confused, I think, in my conventions there of naming the run, but this was done 7 miles at goal pace. The only thing you're going to find here is that the pacing was not as consistent as I thought it was. It felt very consistent while I was running it, but there's actually some decent deviation in mileage here, and you'll see that as we go. So obviously, since this was a 7-mile goal pace run, it was ran at 7 miles. The average pace came out at 6:44, so probably just a touch faster than I would actually see myself running the marathon. Realistically, I'm trying to aim for about a 7-minute flat per mile, maybe even up to 7:15 range, depending on how I'm feeling that day. So I'm giving myself a pretty big window to run it at. So I ran these probably a little bit faster, And I think you'll see why as I kind of go through the run. Now, what I found pretty exciting about this was all of the kind of PRs and near PRs that I got in various shorter distances. So this was, according to Strava, my best estimated 10K effort at 43:50. Once again, I think a time that's very soft. I'd love to see this go to at least 39:59 by the end of this training program, but it's not a major goal of mine. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, that's totally fine too. I'm not training for a 10K, I'm training for a marathon. However, it was good to also see some faster and shorter distances. So a 2-mile effort in the 12:47 range. And then also a 5K that was a little bit below 21 minutes and a decently fast mile at 6:17 in there as well. So you can see this kind of what I was talking about before, where there's this little bit of deviation in pacing. The first 2 miles were amazingly back-to-back 6:33s. That's I don't know if I've ever run 2 miles back-to-back the exact same time like that. So that was pretty cool. Then the middle chunk of it, I was in the low 7s. This first mile, it could make sense, even though it only shows 15 feet of elevation gain. There's a pretty big hill here on Nantucket Boulevard behind Everett Alvarez High School. So as you're running by the high school, it starts kind of with a slow incline, and then it gets to a bigger incline there near the top of the hill. It's not totally massive or unattainable by any means in terms of kind of getting up it, but it is enough that it would affect pace. So that doesn't shock me that that mile was a little bit slower. However, once you get up to Nantucket, it's relatively flat, and it also starts to go downhill, as does Constitution. So I was actually surprised that this mile was only a 7:05. That seems actually really, really soft. If there was a bad mile in this run, this probably would have been it. I'm not entirely sure why that mile was so slow, just because you are basically running down a hill the entire time for this particular mile. Now, the final 2 miles are also really kind of exciting because they're just quick, so, and they're also deeper into the run where you would, assume that your legs are a little tired. Instead, you're still seeing some really good effort here at these final 2 miles. So the final 2 miles, we have a 6:23 mile, and the 7th mile was 6:27. So 2 pretty nice quick miles. The 2 fastest miles of the run were the last 2 miles of the run, and they were done on a slightly downhill and uphill basis. So coming down Independence here is basically a very slow decline, whereas coming up Independence and some of the side streets here, you would have some very mild incline. So really back-to-back to see the pacing that equal is pretty good. That 6:27 final mile is probably the best mile of the day. And that's really cool that it's also the final mile. So I was able to save my best for that particular effort. So overall, was really, really happy with this run. The only thing that I wish that I would have right now is the ability to track my heart rate, because I would have loved to have known why I was able to kind of maintain that level of speed near the end. And not necessarily why, but where I was at physically. Unfortunately, my Fitbit Versa 2 is just on the fritz. It's pretty much probably done. So I can't get that data as readily as I used to be able to, because right now I'm still just using the Strava Android app until I end up replacing my watch. But with that being said, that's a small factor. It'd just be nice to know, because I am a big believer that if your heart rate is much, much too high, then you're better off just tapering down your efforts a little bit more so that you're not basically overtraining essentially. But by and large, a very fun week, a very motivational run for me to bump this type of mileage out at this pace, over that length of distance. In a couple of weeks, I'll be able to do a half marathon time trial, and I think that'll be really exciting to see where that ends up peaking out at. Because if that particular run comes out at kind of a similar pacing, then it could change my opinion a little bit, or if it comes out faster. In either case, that could change my opinion just a bit about what I should aim for the marathon. But by and large, I think this is still indicative that I can give 3:05 an effort in December. And if it just doesn't work out, it just doesn't work out. But so far, trending nicely. We'll see how this continues on into week 7, and I will see you guys then.